Buenos noches, buenos tardes to this yet another Sunday story in a day. It's been another week. It's insane how quick it goes. Thank you to all those who viewed my story last week, which was a made-up story on the theme of equality. And this week's theme has been chosen because of a number of reasons. Firstly, and most predominantly, it's because before lockdown I was involved and cast and working for a company called Thiasos, link and details below, and they were doing a play called Plautus, and I played Hermes, the god of many things, but known predominantly as the messenger to Mount Olympus. And his name is sort of taken for a number of purposes, including a delivery company, Hermes, which you may have heard of. But secondly, it's down to a personal reason, because at the start of lockdown, I was very involved in everything. I did virtual rehearsals, some live shows, I spoke to more people, I got involved with all the many goings on that have been throughout this lockdown period. But then over the past few weeks and months, due to a number of reasons, I've stopped those lines. And now I probably speak to about 5 people regularly. And in some ways I'm not happy about that, I do regret it. Which is why I wanted to do this week's theme on communication. So to those who have seen these videos before, you know that this is just the introduction, and then I'm going to go off and learn. I get the order wrong every time. I'm going to go off and research, learn and tell a story in this full day. Now, we've been blessed with the weather today, and it means I can start this outside, but it's likely to change. So you may see a different backdrop. But until then, I'm going to go play some tennis, and then I'm going to research you a story. Ta-ta for now, folks. So as I said, come down to the tennis courts, having a quick spot of tennis. And tennis is all about communication, because you've got to communicate with your partner where the ball's going. So I've just had a couple of hours playing tennis, and now it's time to go and look into some stories, although part of me just wants to collapse into a ball of ice cream. So I've started having a look at a article thing with a number of stories, which I was very surprised to find, and one of them actually is a story about birds and a boy that communicates with them, which could be decent. I'm also going to have a look at other messenger stories, as well as, of course, stories about Hermes. So it's after 3, and it looks as if we've still got about 2 hours of nice weather. So if I get my butt in gear, I should be able to get this done before then. And I've got it down to a handful of stories that I'm interested in. The first is a lovely story about a father who treats his son badly, so he talks to the birds. And then the other 2 are stories about death, which, of course, death has messengers. And I'm a big fan of death stories, and similarly, one of them's a Grimm's tale. And I've already got a handful of Grimm, and we can all agree the Grimm brothers are fantastic storytellers, so it'd be decent to learn one of them. I'm also looking into Hermes, but I don't think I'm going to share one of the stories of him. However, I'll try and share some decent facts or myths of sorts. Hey, hey, I said hey, what's going on? And I said hey, 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 hey. So, I can't do any stories in this, so I'm going to go and get myself a shirt, which happens to be behind this curtain. So I thought I'd do something with my hair, because lockdown has made it grow. Time to tell you a story. Let's go. That rhymed! Here we are, week 3 for our story in a day. And this week's theme is communication. Interestingly enough, I looked into the origin of the word communication, which comes from the Latin root word common or commonus. Made that up. It probably isn't commonus. That just sounds Latin. But ultimately it means to share. And this word leads to things like common room, commonality. And communication is ultimately sharing information. So if we have a look historically or in the current times, what shares information and perhaps the parallels with them. So this week I've been looking at various companies and figures that share information, including some you may have heard of, some that you haven't. For instance, the post office. Everyone knows the post office. There's a post office on every street in every town. The logo is engraved in everyone's mind. But of course, over the last few years, there have been issues with the post office, and there was a documentary on BBC One called The Scandal at the Post Office, which I'd say that is a must-watch. It's very, very well made. And that's one of the reasons why I chose communication as this week's theme. Throughout history, there have been all sorts of messengers. So I have created the top 3 messengers, one of which I'm going to tell you a story about. The first, and perhaps the most obvious from the rest of this video, is Hermes. So I'm not going to tell you a story about Hermes. However, I will tell you that he is the son of Zeus. He is the god of many, many things, including hospitality, including mischievousness, including treachery, including lots of things I can't remember now, and I'll put them all below because that's what I do when I get lazy. Additionally, on his very first day in the world of the Greeks, he took a tortoise shell and he strewn, that's a word, isn't it? Strewn, is that right? Fibers of an animal onto it. And he made the first lyre on his first day of birth. Something that a lot of people may know is that Hermes was one of those who transported souls to the underworld, which links very well to the story I'm going to tell you. The second messenger, and the one that I think is most surprising, is the humble bumblebee. Now, throughout a lot of ancient times, the bumblebee has been the one that you share information with. A swarm of bumblebees in Roman times was not a good sign at all. It meant that the gods had something to share with the mortals, and you should run away from a swarm of bumblebees, and not just because they'd sting you. Additionally, if something had happened in your family, like a birth, a marriage, or a death, it was up to you to tell the bees, because otherwise more bad things could happen to you. And I actually found an interesting story about why the bumblebee has its sting, which I'm hoping I'll get to share with you at some point. Rising up the ranks at number 3 is the messenger that I will tell you about. Now, due to the current times and the current climate, this could be a fairly controversial decision or a taboo topic. However, just like last week, I thought sometimes these topics you have to go head on with. And ultimately, the story isn't about what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to stop taking the scenic route and tell you that the third messenger is Death, the the Grim Reaper, the persons whose job it is to take us from one life to the afterlife. And like many death stories, this one comes from the Grimm brothers, who have some fantastic but really dark tales, including one that I've told a few times about death as a godfather called Godfather Death. And this one is as... I'll let you decide. Who do you think would win in a fight between a giant and death? Let's have a look at them in a bit more detail. Death, with its skeletal figure, its hooded cloak, its scythe to take those who are reluctant to come to the afterlife. A giant, taller than the trees, angry, with a certain stupidity about them. Death, or a giant. Well, this is how this story begins. For one day, Death found it his duty to go and bring a giant with him to the afterlife. And so he went down to the woods where he knew that the giant would be. And he said, "Giant, stop. You are to come with me." And the giant said, "Who are you, tiny little thing, to tell me what to do? I could crush you with my fist if I wanted to." "Giant, you have to come with me. It is your time." And this led to a fight breaking out between the giant and Death. And it was vicious, and it was bloody. And whilst it looked as if Death finally had the upper hand, the giant, with his big massive fist, sent Death to the ground and thundered away through the woods, knocking over trees. And Death lay there in the ground, face down, contemplating the place that he must send everybody, that he may be visiting very soon. And then a new thought came into his head. I am the one who removes those from this land. If I do not do my job, the land will soon become overcrowded. Everybody will be stood shoulder to shoulder. There'll be no more space for new people to come, but yet they will. I must continue my job. I must get up. But he couldn't. But then he heard a soft thundering of hooves coming down the track. And there, on horseback, was a young male. He was energetic. He was vibrant. He was in the peak of his life. And he was singing a sweet song. And when he saw this figure lying down, looking not at their best, he got off his horse and he came down. And he shared with them some of his drink, the ale that was in his tankard. And he lifted the figure up. Life was breathed back into Death. And Death opened his eyes slowly and said, "Do you know who I am?" And the man said, "I do not. I was passing on horseback as I do every day, and I saw someone down on their luck, and I thought I would come and help." "Well, you've certainly saved me. I am Death. It is my job to take those whose time it is. It is not your time yet. However, your time will be coming. Is there anything I can do for you? Any wish you may have?" Now, Death wasn't that figure that came out of the magic lamp. He's not the sort of character that would wish anything, have 3 wishes, have all the gold that you want, have the woman of your dreams. No, he was more realistic. Just a simple wish, whatever this man wanted. And he'd be able to grant it. I would like to know when my time is due. I do not want you coming and surprising me. I want notice. Well, that can be. I will send my messengers to you when I am coming to take you to the next life. And that is a promise. And just like that, Death disappeared into the trees, mainly the ones that weren't knocked over by the giant, and the man got on his horse and went away. A new lease of life on him, a safety net of sorts. He didn't go crazy with this promise, but he did start taking more risks. He'd go a little bit faster on his horse. He'd climb the rocks a little bit higher than he'd used to. He put a little bit more fuel into the fires that he made, for he knew that when his time came, he'd have notice. The man lived a happy life, and he lived every day as they came. He met a beautiful maid, and together they started a happy life as a married couple, and they had many, many children over many years. And some of these children went off travelling, and others stayed with man and wife. Almost a quarter of a century later, the man took his eldest son and daughter into a room, and he told them about that time all those years ago that he saved Death, and the promise that Death had made. It was good that he didn't take you there and then. They weren't kids. Why do they talk like that? Let's go with it. It's a story. Papa, it's good that he didn't take you there and then, because otherwise we wouldn't have you as a father, and we would never have been born. The man felt happy that he could share the news with his family. Of course, his wife already knew, but now his children did. And the 4 of them decided to go on a voyage to visit the other children, those who had gone travelling in their early years. But as the voyage went on, the storms began approaching, the waves lifted, the lightning flashed, and water began to fill the deck. And some of the wood began to get chipped off, and the sails became damaged. But all the time the man was calm, and he said, "Whilst I am safe, you are all safe. For Death promised me that he would come and tell me when it is my time. And as we cannot see him, it is not my time, so therefore it is not yours." And now that his family knew the truth about that visit, they were reassured. And sure enough, the sun came out, and the little boat gently trundled towards land. And that man could visit all of his children happily and celebrate them, all the birthdays that he missed, some of the weddings, and they had some wonderful parties. But soon, all that came fading out, and the man had a sense that this may be the last time he'd see his children. He was a little bit sad, but he knew he still had many, many years ahead of him. So he got back on the boat and he went back to his hometown with his wife and his 2 eldest children. There things became a little bit different. You see, he was getting older now. His hair was going greyer. Some of his teeth were falling out. He would find that in the night he would not be able to sleep, and yet that's all he wanted to do during the day. His limbs would fail him as he was picking things up. He would feel sick. His body was fighting against him constantly. And yet he powered through and lived life the best he could, for he had still not seen death. Well, one fateful night, as midnight struck, tap, 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 the man turned around, and there was the figure he had seen all those years ago in the woods, looking powerful, but kind, and a lot more stronger than he had looked at that time. It is your time. But Death, you promised me you would come and tell me. You would send messengers. I have received no such information. You have received messengers. Your grey hair, your teeth falling out, your failing limbs. My own brother Sleep came to you just a few weeks ago to tell you that your time is near. Sickness, fatigue. I have sent them all. It is not my fault if you didn't recognize these signs. And the man bowed his head, and he looked at Death, and he said nothing, for he knew that Death had kept his word. And so he followed the path that Death was pointing to, and went on to the next life. But I think there's something more to this story. I think that Death actually tricked this man. Because those messengers, they're not just resigned to him. Anybody who lives a prosperous and full life gets this communication. And so, as with many stories about Death, I think he probably got the upper hand. Although, of course, he was just doing his duty, like any of us. But just like the post office and any other messengers of today, sometimes we don't like the information that we're given. But if we listen to it and understand it, perhaps we're going to learn something about our own future, or about what's happening to other people. And that, at the end of the day, is all communication is. The ability to share. Until next week, I've been James Little, and this has been a story that I have researched, learnt, and told in a day. Ciao, ciao.
Hey, hey, hey. I said, hey. What's going on?